In 1991, legendary basketball star Hall of Famer Magic Johnson was going to die. Or at least that's what everyone thought. On November 7th of that year, Magic announced that he had contracted HIV. It was an awful, tragic, painful revelation that stunned the world.
Good evening. The news is so shocking and so unexpected, it is difficult to absorb it even as we report it. Magic Johnson has tested positive for the HIV virus. That's the first step to AIDS. Magic Johnson, a basketball superstar so beloved, so well known. His first name was all he needed well beyond the world of sports. Tonight, Magic announced that he is retiring from basketball because of his condition.
Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will have to retire from the Lakers today. I think sometimes we think, well, only gay people can get it, well, it's not going to happen to me. And here I am saying that it can happen to anybody, even me, Magic Johnson, it can happen to.
All around the country, people were scared and upset. It was all everyone talked about the next day. Nightly news highlighted an AIDS hotline that was inundated with worried calls.
At AIDS hotlines in Los Angeles and elsewhere, the phones were ringing off the hook, people asking all sorts of questions about the disease.
People are frightened. People who previously thought they were not vulnerable to this realize that they are.
Now, at the time, contracting HIV was essentially a death sentence. There were some drugs available that could sometimes delay the progression of the disease, but there was no cure. And that was a reality that Magic Johnson faced in 1991. But he did return to the court, playing at the 1992 Olympics, and in 1985, he played one more season for the Lakers, went on to tour with the All-Star team. He, of course, became an entrepreneur, launched a successful media career, and along the way, Magic Johnson went from being a man facing certain death, who the world was preemptively mourning, to just a normal guy, albeit a very, very wealthy and famous one. Because, thanks to a lot of research and the development of new drugs, HIV became something you could live with. We have not eradicated HIV and AIDS. We have converted it from a death sentence to a manageable virus. With the medications now available, people who contract HIV can live full, regular lives. And Magic Johnson was one of the first, maybe the first highly visible people who demonstrated that to the world. Now, more than 2 years into the COVID pandemic, after 1 million deaths just here in the US, millions more around the world, I've been thinking about that example because I think it's a way to start to see a world where we can live with this virus too. Now, as you probably noticed, I've been out for a few days. I had COVID, which is not a certain death sentence by any means, obviously. I'm vaccinated and boosted. The first 36 hours or so, I was pretty knocked out, felt like having the flu. But then my doctor prescribed me the antiviral drug you maybe have heard about called Paxlovid. And I got to say, my symptoms rapidly improved. Now, when Paxlovid first became available at the end of last year, there's very limited supply, and the drug was reserved for patients at high risk, which made complete sense for rationing a scarce resource. But as with the vaccines, the problem right now in this country isn't supply, it's demand. Paxlovid is wildly underutilized and is just sitting on shelves. Now, we should say there are limitations. It's authorized under emergency use authorization. It has to be taken within 5 days of the onset of symptoms in order to be effective, so you got to get it just about as soon as you test positive. There have also been some somewhat worrying recent cases of patients relapsing after completing their 5-day course, which obviously needs to be studied further. Right now, doctors are still limited by the FDA regulations. The agency authorized Paxlovid for people at high risk due to certain health conditions like heart disease and obesity, although the list is quite long and largely covers a really big chunk of the population. But the fact that there are millions of doses of this drug just sitting unused is kind of insane to me. I mean, this was the therapeutic that we were kind of waiting for, at least the first generation of something that really does work, a drug that when taken right away can really minimize the symptoms of this virus. And I can tell you, I took it, it made a huge difference for me. It shows a lot of promise as a way to dramatically reduce the danger and disruption of a virus that it seems is just going to keep circulating forever. A new poll shows that less than a third of Americans are worried about getting COVID, while cases are once again rising around the country. People are over it, and I get that. Almost no one wants to talk about COVID anymore, certainly not politicians. Basically, no one wants to close down bars, and things like mask requirements have been either struck down by courts or just dropped. But the virus is not gone. And we have basically abandoned any and all public health measures, non-pharmaceutical interventions to stop it from circulating. Now, the good news is that we now live in a world in which the overwhelming majority of folks can, at least theoretically, be vaccinated and boosted. And everyone who comes down with COVID, again, could theoretically get this antiviral drug right away, feel much better, much faster, dramatically reduce risk. If this were the reality, near 100% boosting rate and universal automatic access to antiviral therapeutics, it would massively improve the situation for all of us. And again, it's not unlike what happened with HIV. For years, a cure seemed practically impossible. But slowly, with a lot of very hard work, we developed the therapeutics that have made it completely manageable. If treated properly, patients can be asymptomatic. And there was no magic cure announced from one day to the next. It wasn't Jonas Salk with polio. But even as the drugs were developed, there was also a multi-decade fight to get those drugs to be made cheaply enough to be accessible to the world's poorest people. But today, we even have a highly effective medicine to prevent people from getting HIV in the first place. There are commercials for it all over TV. It's as commonplace and as accessible as statins to lower your cholesterol. Effective COVID treatments like Paxlovid, at least now, appears to be, should be the same, right? I mean, in the early days of HIV and AIDS, it was all focused on non-pharmaceutical interventions, safe sex to stop the transmission. We then developed tools to deal with it in a medical and pharmaceutical sense, right? So we've got COVID now. We should be continuing efforts to develop more treatments and even better vaccines, and to keep educating the public about the importance of boosters and vaccination and the availability of Paxlovid. But that's not what we're doing. Instead, Congress just put COVID funding on the back burner, cutting it out of a package with funding for Ukraine. In Missouri, the legislature there recently passed a bill, and I am not making this up, a bill making it illegal for pharmacists to tell patients that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are not effective treatments for COVID, even though that has been shown by multiple studies. So if we're going to let COVID circulate relatively unchecked, which appears to be the current policy consensus, well, then for the love of God, we need to do everything we can to use the tools that we have, which we have developed, to reduce the risk and disruption it poses. That means really putting our back into the effort to develop the next generation of vaccines and drugs and getting ones we have, like Paxlovid, to everyone who needs and wants it. It is an abomination if Congress, particularly the Republicans in Congress who are balking at this, walk away from that basic duty.